and said, see, even the postal department of this country knows where I live. That was him. That was because he would always, he knew how to poke fun at himself also, his community also, at others also. That was, I think, great, because he could mix with the presidents and the kings and the queens and the prime ministers, and he could mix with the common man on the street equally well. I happened to travel with him quite a lot, overseas and in India, and knew how he felt about people. But on a more serious note, for the first fest when Rahul, Neelufar and I were about to leave Delhi next morning for Kasauli to make preparations for the first fest, and I said goodbye to him, and he just waved out and said, goodbye, all the best. I'd just gone out of his apartment in Khushwant Singh Park to my car when his cook Chandan came running and said, Saab bula rahe hain. So I went inside, and suddenly I saw he was a bit serious in those just 30 seconds. And I could see a slight mist in his eyes. And he stretched out his right hand, took my hand, and said, I would like to dedicate this festival to the Indian soldier. Please see to it. Please see to it that the Indian soldier gets a standing ovation. And I think we need to honor that commitment to the Indian soldier. Mr. Khushwant Singh, wherever you be today, I'm sure you'll be very, very happy to see all of us here today. Thank you. We'll start with the first session. The inauguration is by Mr. Arun Shourie, who needs no introduction, and I'm sure all of you know him, so I won't waste any time because I know you're all very keen to listen to him. And Mr. Shatrughan Sinha, for example, never gets up early, but last night he said, I am coming only for this session in the morning. And he's here, he's made it on time. So has Vikram Seth made it here, who is so busy writing his book. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. Arun, can we have the honor of your coming up to the stage? The subject of Mr. Shourie's talk is going to be how to recognize rulers for what they are. It's not, basically we don't discuss politics out here. We only discuss about literature, books, authors. But in this particular case, Arun is going to talk about the book, the next book that is already being written. It's in the process of being written, and he will going to talk about it. And the leaders reminds me, Arun, if I have your permission, to just give one example from Khushwant Singh. Gyani Zail Singh had just been, he had just become the president, but he hadn't taken oath, so he was president-elect. And he once rang up Khushwant and said, "Ke main khana chana." So Khushwant invited him for dinner. With one condition, time is 7 o'clock. Since you will only have your glass of lassi or pani, you can come a bit late, but not after that. So Khushwant that day invited just a few friends who also knew Gyani Zail Singh, and some of the other I happened to be there. 7 o'clock, 7:15, 7:30, 7:45, no sign of Gyani ji. 8 o'clock, he had a personal assistant at that time by the name of Avtar Singh. So Avtar Singh called and said, Gyani ji chalan wale honi bas aa rahe hain. But Bibi ji, Khushwant's wife, immediately says, khana laga diyo. Because 8 o'clock drinking time is over. 8, 8:15, 8:30. Then Avtar says, Gyani ji gaddi baithan lage. So he tells me, because I happen to pick up the phone, so he tells me, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿ ਦਿਓ ਜੀ kitchen ਬੰਦ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਹੁਣ ਕਿਸੇ ਹੋਰ ਵੇਲੇ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ. And they said, no, he's coming. He says, no, the cook has also gone now. So that was Khushwant. I think I'll leave. There are many other incidents, but I think I'll leave it. In fact, Arun has quite a few of them, and I remember one of Jayalalitha. Jayalalitha, but I'll leave it to him to tell you all about that. Mr. Arun Shourie, ladies and gentlemen, present to you.
Friends, actually, everybody has a favorite experience with Mr. Khushwant Singh, and everybody has a favorite line of his, and everybody elaborates on them. Ashok forgot one point in that. You see, when that letter came, it was actually from Norway, because it was from one of these terrorists who had escaped. When Khushwantji was with his great bravery, he had taken such a strong stand against terrorism in Punjab. So, letter se kaha Khushwant Singh, the bastard India. So, पहुंच गया. तो Khushwant Singh ji ne postal department में phone किया कि भाई there are so many Khushwant Singhs in India. How do you know that I am the only bastard? So. Everyone has these favorite lines of his, and my personal favorite was that when he was asked, he had written once that he had been searching all his life for the elixir for youth, and had at last found that the only elixir for eternal youth is a reliable hair dye. And everyone has these experiences. He was narrating about Gyani ji. So I was in a bookshop, and so the bookseller asked me, "आपने जी खुशवंत सिंह जी की लेटेस्ट किताब खरीदी है?" मैंने कहा नहीं खरीदी. किस चीज़ पर है? कहते जी सेक्स, स्कॉच एंड स्कॉलरशिप. और मैं कहा यार छोड़ो की है. कहता नहीं सर, इट इज़ डेडिकेटेड टू योर वाइफ. So the dedication was to Anita Shourie, the fairest of them all. So Jayalalitha, he called us for dinner. And in those days, he was a member of the Rajya Sabha, and the person sitting next to him used to be Jayalalitha. We were there at 7 o'clock, and Jayalalitha was much lighter at that time than we now sort of collectively remember her. And I was really struck by her intelligence and her articulateness. I mean, it was a surprise to me. So then she and my wife, who's also absolutely ravishing beauty at that time, and Mrs. Khushwant Singh were talking, and Khushwant, तो सारी छोटा जा कमरा है, एक दूसरे से, you can hear what everybody is saying. Khushwant ji looked at me and said, "Oh, पता मैं इन्हें क्यों बुलाया?" मैं कही नहीं, मैं पता नहीं. ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਣ ਲਈ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਵੀ ਸੋਹਣੀ ਕੁੜੀਆਂ ਨੇ. So I said, sir, ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਮਝ ਨਾ ਲਿਆ ਹਿੰਦੀ. So after just 15 seconds he said, ਤੈਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਇਹਦਾ ਸਿਰ ਫਿਰਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ ਹੈ? He said, I ਇਹਨੂੰ ਚਿੱਠੀਆਂ ਲਿਖਦੀ ਹੈ, 12-12 ਪੇਜ ਦੀ ਚਿੱਠੀਆਂ ਦਿੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਰਾਜ ਸਭਾ ਵਿੱਚ. I can't even repeat to you what he said. उन चिट्ठियों में क्या था. Then he said कि मैं सोचा एक बारी कि पब्लिश ही कर दो. मगर फिर मैंने याद आया, there was a lady in Madras who had had acid thrown on her. And that civil servant, IAS officer, he said मैं फिर सोचा कि यार ये मुझे दाढ़ी क्यों acid ना बंद करवाई. तो मैं वो कसौली रखी हुई है, पता नहीं उन्हें है कि नहीं है. But there are favorite tales about him. I think once he wrote about, he was the publicity in charge at the Indian High Commission in London, and Panditji was visiting, and his job was to ensure the maximum publicity. So he had given information as to where Panditji was staying in a hotel, and all the correspondents and photographers were there. But the person who emerged from the room was Lady Mountbatten. So Panditji was furious. And Khushwant Singh writes that I did not know why he was furious. My job was to ensure full publicity. I ensured full all the photographs. Now, is it a fact, or is it fiction, or is it faction? You never knew with Mr. Khushwant Singh. Everyone also has his favorite grouse. And my grouse was, with all his wit and humor and everything, kande bahut kache se. And one of these, and we were, I mean, I was naturally very fond of him and so on. And then my wife started getting unwell, and contacts became less and less. And then the publishers, thinking that we were good friends, sent one of my books to him. And he wrote a very nasty thing, which is just not true. One of these tale gatherers had told him, कि थोड़ा दोस्त अरुण पुरी तो कहता कि वो मस्जिद ही नहीं है, this बाबरी मस्जिद, तो इसलिए काबू कर लो. And then how he had cut me out and so on. I did not know of any of this. He could have easily asked, because I had actually been writing the opposite, warning, saying that this place will be brought down precisely because it is a mosque. And please, therefore, don't bend to terrorists, don't bend to Shabano and all this business. But in retrospect, these things seem so small. Firak ki ek couplet hai कि जोरो सितम को सब भूल कर तुम पहरों रहोगे तुम उदास. क्या मेरी क्रूअल्टीज और एंगर सबको भूल कर तुम दोपहर चार पहर रहोगे तुम उदास. याद जब आएंगी मेरी शुक्रनुमा शिकायतें. So it is the same thing. And in that particular case about his writing that, I only felt in the end that he had violated his own rule. Because he used to write nasty things about people only after they were dead. So he was once asked, why do you do this? Man has died, and now you are writing this? He said, no, after they are dead, they are less liable to sue for defamation. So it is, but the subject that Ashok has assigned to me is, because we had one thing in common, I feel, and that was that we made one or two big mistakes. In his case, I don't know if he felt in the end that it was a mistake, but his support for the emergency and his support for Sanjay Gandhi. And in my case, I've said publicly that I've made two very great mistakes, once in supporting Mr. VP Singh, and once in supporting Mr. Narendra Modi, and these are my two great mistakes. So I will now like to address the question as to how much settlement रह गया नहीं बोलने में तो वो नु बंद कर यार. Because so how to guard yourself against such mistakes? I think the first rule to remember in India is that it is much safer to warn people about a potential leader than to support him. Because if you warn people, he will always live up to your warnings. But if you support him, he will always disappoint you because he will not display the virtues which you saw in him. And very often we do this because of our disgust with the present situation. I remember Rajiv Gandhi had so many 326 criminal cases and raids and so on against us in the Indian Express when we were doing this Bofors business. And so we were so fed up. We started supporting him, and we regretted for our rest of our lives because VP Singh enacted this Mandal business. And Chandrasekhar had rung up my good friend Cho Ramaswamy, saying, your friend Arun Shuri is supporting VP Singh, warn him. I know him. He is the most opportunistic fellow. You should never support him. Warn your fellow. Stop him. So Cho rang me, but Chandrasekhar says it. He had a very high regard for Chandrasekhar. Chandrasekhar says it, so you stop it. I said, Cho, there is a Russian proverb that when your house is on fire, you can't wait for Ganges water. You have to do with municipal water. So Cho said, but are you sure it is not petrol? तो वही हुआ. अब भी यही हुआ कि डॉक्टर साहब की, we felt that he had abdicated his authority, and we all got so upset. और आज ये सिचुएशन है कि सब डॉक्टर साहब को याद करते हैं. मैं जब वो थे, मैंने 6 महीने के बाद ही मोदी के वो थे एक फंक्शन में, तो मैंने कहा था, किसी ने पूछा कि भाई what do you say about the situation today? Okay, that can be described in one sentence. अब लोग डॉक्टर साहब को याद करने लग गए. तुसी जो मर्जी कह रहा हो, मगर बंदा सियाना सी. So in that situation, we must not, as they say, you should be very careful for what you wish for, because it may come true and you will then regret it. I think there's not the time about this, but one of the things we must always remember is that don't go by what these fellows say now. Go by what they have been saying in the past. Secondly, believe that, because that is what they will do when they come to office. This delusion that no, office will tame them, no, there will be intelligent people around them who will tame them. Look at what's happening in America with Trump. No, office brings about its, rounds off corners on its own and so on. Believe them that they will implement what they have been saying for a long time. And actually, don't even go by what they are saying. See by what they have been doing and what they have condoned other people doing. So that's very important for the future. And when claims are made about them, please examine them in great detail. I think this was one of the great failures of our newspapers, of people like me and others, who did not examine the claims about the Gujarat model. Ab yaad aa raha hai, keh rahe, yaar ye to tha nahi. That it was an event management. For instance, everybody is always surprised that these Gujarat Vibrant Summits, 10 lakh crore promise ho gaye investment ke, 15 lakh crore ho gaye. In all the 9 summits, it took 3 years for an organization to find out that of those pledges which were announced and proclaimed as great successes, what proportion was resulted in actual investment. Can anybody guess? 6%. 6%. But it was tom-tommed as a success. So the same thing now. It's become a habit. The other day I had to recall an interview of Mr. Modi for a long, in which he said, an early interview, in which the interviewer asking him कि सर आप को बहुत शौक है कि किन चीज़ों का शौक था? उन्होंने कहा मुझे ट्रैकिंग का बहुत शौक था. अच्छा, तो कहाँ ट्रैक करते थे आप? पहाड़ों का बहुत शौक है. एकांत, शांत, प्रकृति. इसे तो आप तो बहुत ऊंचाई पर गए होंगे. He said, हाँ, एवरेस्ट कोई 29,000 फुट की, मैं 25,000 तक तो गया था. टहलते टहलते चप्पलों में 25,000 पहुंच गए. So I asked the person the other day, do you know how many peaks there are in India which are more than 25,000 feet? She didn't know. It's not Everest because that's in Nepal. Not K2 or Nanga Parbat, that's in Pakistan. Not Nanda Devi because that is shorter. I'm sure he did not know. But he said it. There's only one peak, that's Kanchenjunga. And if he had climbed that in chappals, it would certainly be in the annals of the Indian Mountaineering Institute, situated next door in Darjeeling. Not, we checked the record, not there. So we have to believe and you have to look at these traits. That's the main point. Not what they say now, what they have been saying for a long time. Secondly, not what they say, but what they are doing and what they have condoned other people to do. And then what are the traits of their character? Because that character is what will assert itself sooner or later, and it will become the character of the government. And therefore of the great influence that that government will have on the affairs of the country. And for instance, on this business of koi bhi figure de do, every report, including the economic survey of the government, of the Ministry of Finance, Reserve Bank, Center for the Monitoring of the Indian Economy, State Bank of India annual report, they say कि jobs नहीं create हो रहे. In fact, between January and April, they say that 1.5 million jobs were lost. And they had promised to create 2 crore jobs per year. 4 days ago, full page ads, Chandigarh mein bhi aaye honge, certainly Delhi ke papers mein the, that by mudra alone, the government has created 5.5 crore jobs. कहाँ है, मतलब कैसे गायब हो जाते हैं? ये गोगिया पाशा का जादू, 5.5 करोड़ चीज क्रिएट हुई और आपको दिख ही नहीं रही. So you have to see the character, and one of the main points to watch in the character is the adherence to truth. If that is not there, then many other things will follow. Is he a man of his word? Never believe that something that is being said by persons close to him is not being said by him. Such leaders are ventriloquists. Trump, look at it, it is the extreme right which is saying it. No. Why would he allow the extreme right to say it? यहाँ कहते हैं कि जी वो नहीं, हर एक, he can't be shutting the mouth of every scouse fellow. But his ministers say that you can't have it both ways. That he knows everything but does not know what they are doing. That he can control everybody but he can't control these fellows from what they are saying. So, and it is a sort of division of labor. और लोग कहते रहेंगे deniability, he will only talk, he means Trump, anybody will talk, always think I'm talking about Trump. Any resemblance to present situation is only in your imagination. So what will happen is that they, and when, this is a sort of orchestrated thing always. You say this, then you can deny it, you can distance yourself if that balloon doesn't fly. Or after 2-3 months, when that slogan or when that sentiment has run its course and brought you the political dividends that you wanted to get out of it, then you make some oracular statement. Motherhood is good. We should all love each other. Gautam Buddha said, हमारा culture ये रहा है. People think, भाई अब तो कह दिया, देखो और क्या कह सकते हैं. But by that time, कुछ पानी निचोड़ना था, वो उसमें से निकाल दिया होता है. And I think one other problem is that we never think, we underestimate them. We underestimate their mendacity, their ruthlessness, their determination. And this is especially the problem with decent people. Because decent people always think, यार सभी हमारे जैसे हैं, इतना तो बुरा नहीं हो सकता. That is an underestimation. And one should never fall for this. And the second reason why we don't accept those things, we don't want to see them, is because if we see them, then we have to change our conduct in regard to them. We have then to stand up. That's the last thing we want to do. हमारा एक, मैं कल शोभा को बता रहा था कि इब्न इंशा पाकिस्तान के एक शायर होते थे, तो उनका था कि हमारा जो कल्चर है वो ये है कि हक अच्छा, ट्रूथ इज गुड, राइटियसनेस इज गुड, हक अच्छा, इसके लिए कोई और मरे तो और अच्छा. So that attitude, and that attitude you cannot sustain if you face the fact, yes, this fellow is a mortal danger to the values for which I stand. So all these things, but there are four features, and there is not enough time now to go through them. But one is this narcissism. We always think the person has a great ego. Wrong. Ego has some strength. But narcissism, by definition, is fragile. Why? Because narcissist knows that he is not as beautiful as he thinks. So he has to always reassure himself by keeping on looking in the river. So these people also require assurance all the time. This Ashish Nandi once told me that Casanova has to reassure himself every evening that he can still conquer. So they require repeated reaffirmation. And one of the ways of this is to always keep knocking. हम कहते हैं कि वो लोगों को उछाल देता है, मिनिस्टरों को वो करता है, insecure रखता है, etc. That's not what you call inconveniencing the minister so much as reassuring himself that Trump, I can fire. I can say that my Secretary of State, he's wasting his time. And that Secretary of State said that fellow is a moron. But both continue. But the narcissist is this insecurity, which is very different from merely an ego. The second is Machiavellianism. This attitude towards everybody and everything and every occasion as an instrument. कि भाई इसका प्रयोग क्या हो सकता है? What use can I make of this person or of this occasion? So उत्तराखंड में वो लैंडस्लाइड आ गई. सडनली ख्याल आया कि चलो वहाँ, एंड सडनली 1.5 दिन के बाद प्रेस वो आगे चीज़ें कि भाई न्यूज़ स्टोरीज आ गई टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया हर एक जगह कि जी 15,000 गुजरातियों को बचा लिया. वो एयरफोर्स वालों ने कहा, आर्मी वालों ने कहा कि 15,000 तो व्हीकल आ ही नहीं सकती थी वहाँ से जहाँ से लोग फंसे हुए थे. मगर it did, and then you can always say I never said it. वो तो मीडिया वालों ने कहा भैया. So this deniability, but this idea of how to use it. You'll remember that Pawan will remember with his good memory of that fire in the temple in Kerala recently. ना कितने लोग मर गए थे. But immediately you arrived, and with the mandatory photographer, not seeing what infections you can cause to persons suffering 50%, 75% burns. But the point is occasion. What use can I make of this thing? It's like that pushing Zuckerberg aside. Camera idhar hai. So that is a feature of Machiavellianism. And the last feature is of what's called sociopathy. I don't want to use the word that the psychologists use. You will think that I am really abusing, but it's sociopathy. Sociopathy, the essential point about sociopathy is remorselessness. You don't feel sorry for anything that you have done because you have convinced yourself you are working only for the greater cause. Trump is only working for the greater, for his country. So he's never sorry for anything that he does. Of the use he makes of persons, of the way he discards them. No, I'm doing it for a greater purpose. Actually, I am the one who has done a favor. Who would have cared for him? I gave him the opportunity to be part of history. So you think he should be obliged to you. He knows you. You should be obliged to him. And this is then compounded, these three things then are compounded by a sense of victimhood. If you see, Trump is always complaining about how people are, against him and how the media is trying to denounce him and all this. Idhar bhi, कि demonetization के बाद मुझे कितने जुल्म सहने पड़े. कहते कि साहब उनकी स्पीचें हैं कि भाई लोग मुझे मार भी दें, जान से भी मार दें, मैं दलितों को ये सेवा करने से नहीं चूकूंगा. फिर कौन कह रहा है मार देंगे? But it is not a rhetoric. This is a belief. Because victimhood then allows you to victimize anybody else. Why should I be suspicious of everybody? Of a gentle fellow like Vikram Seth. Why? Because everybody is devious, so I must be devious. Everybody is out to get me. Therefore, I must get him before he gets me. It justifies everything. So there are a lot of such traits, but the time is, he's put such a big clock here, Ashok with his sense of discipline, that so the only point I want to make in the end is, please open your eyes. Open your eyes in time. With every passing day, these things become very difficult to deal with. It was said about Mussolini that Mussolini's goons were nothing without the state. But with the state, they were everything. So you have to preempt that situation. And because the normal channels will no longer be available, cabinet is frightened, the party has been in effect abolished and silenced, not one person can raise a question, parliament has been rendered irrelevant. You see the way the Rajya Sabha was made irrelevant just by a small thing, ye to 15 money bill hai. Hey, there's no basis for that. But you have reduced the parliament to a state assembly. State assemblies are irrelevant, parliament is now irrelevant. So with each passing day, please see what is happening. And therefore, the normal channels for dealing with the situation from now on will not be available. Just see what has happened to the media. Other than one channel and other than one newspaper, only the northern part of that newspaper, nobody else is telling the truth. So, we must all now exert to form to devise other methods for getting the facts across. And my appeal to all these other fellows is, forget these joint programs and all that you want. You know, Khushwant Singh can write a joint program in his sleep in 5 minutes. कितनी बार हमने joint program लिखे? 1977 से तो मैं भी लिख रहा हूँ. So don't wait for joint programs. Have only one program. 1 point. Be Arjun, only the eye of that bird. See only that. What is that 1 point program? Only whether it is a student election, university election, MLA election, parliament election, only one candidate against a BJP candidate. One. ये सब लोग कहते हैं ना, it is no, कुछ ना कुछ हो जाएगा. It is not possible to fool all the people all the time. I've always regarded that as too optimistic a view. It is not necessary to fool all the people all the time. You only have to fool 31% of the people for 3 weeks. Thank you very, very much for your kindness. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun. I will be the first one to buy your next book. Our next session is going to be Khushwant Singh's Insights for Indians at 70. And our speakers are Mr. Pavan Bhai, Mr. Vijay Tankar, Neelima Dalmia, and the moderator is going to be none other than Mr. Rahul Singh. Rahul. It reads as follows. Here lies Khushwant Singh. Good heavens. Has he gone? Don't ever say where to, heaven or hell. Shall we say God? Riddance. But he did not believe in God. Anyway, may his soul rest in peace. But where? Ah, in the minds of men, where he carved himself a place with his pen. That was Mr. Madhusudan. Rahul, please take over.
So can we have a mic here also? Yeah, maybe 2 mics actually. Welcome everybody. It's lovely to see such a full house on the first morning. I don't think we've ever had such a full house in the first morning. Before we begin this session on my father Khushwant Singh, I just like to, this morning, I got a email from somebody who had been coming here from Pakistan regularly. A great friend of India, a big name in Pakistan. He was a minister, he was the Pakistan's probably best known art historian and columnist, Fakir Ijazuddin. His family, his forefathers were served in the court of Ranjit Singh, and he came here regularly. And as you know, my father was very keen on, closer Indo-Pak ties through people-to-people contact. Unfortunately, because of, bad relations with Pakistan, for the last 2 years, including this year, we've not been able to get any Pakistanis over. But I thought I would read out the email that he sent to me this morning, to which I also replied. He said, I've asked Rahul Bhai to read this message to you, our friends. It pains me immeasurably that relations have so deteriorated that I am no longer welcome in a country of which I was once a part, and which is and always will be a part of me. It hurts me to think that it is almost impossible for many of you to visit Hadali, Khushwant Singh's birthplace, here in Pakistan. It is where a portion of Khushwant's ashes are interred, and it grieves me that I cannot pay homage to his ashes interred at Kasauli. In his lifetime, Khushwant saw his beloved Punjab amputated. It seemed that even in death, he has to suffer being divided. Ajaz. And then I sent him a message saying how touched I was with this message of his, and that I would read it out at the Lit Fest. And then he replied, "Many thanks. I wanted you to know that politics apart, we are very much a part of you." That was from Ajaz. So this was one of the, great passions that my father had, having had more, people-to-people contact. Anyway, now I'll get to the session here. We have Vijay Tankha, just retired as Professor of History from St. Stephen's College, Delhi. Pavan Verma, a close friend of my father's, and he needs no introduction. He's a member of the Rajya Sabha and very prominent in politics, author as well. And Nilima Dalmiadhar, who I think was encouraged a great deal by my father to do her writings, and she was also very close to him. So I think we can start now. Maybe, Pavan, you could say something about my father and start the ball rolling, as they say.
Thank you very much, Rahul. First of all, I want to say that after 5 years of persistently trying and making a commitment but not being able to come, I am personally absolutely delighted to be here for the Khushwant Singh Lit Fest. Every year something would happen just when the fest was to take place, and it was a sense of personal loss for me because quite apart from the fact that we have, I don't know how many Ashok Bhai counted literary festivals coming out of our noses and ears, but this is special. This is special because of Khushwantji. And I want to record here today a personal debt to him in my journey as an author. My first book was a biography of Mirza Ghalib. It was called Ghalib, the Man, the Times. And I was then posted in New York in our mission to the United Nations, and completely clueless about publishing. I'd written a 300-page manuscript. I arrived in Delhi. I gave it to many publishers. In those days, the choices were limited. I'm talking of 1986, 87. Nobody seemed to give me an answer. Finally, I went and gifted that manuscript to the Ghalib Academy, saying, you write it, you publish it, you keep the royalties, I'm going back. Fortunately for me, They thought ये नाम वर्मा है, उर्दू तो लगता ही नहीं जानने वाला, ये क्या है, उर्दू दा है ही नहीं. But they didn't open the first page of the manuscript. But in between, and this links Arun Shourie, to Khushwant Singh and to this festival. His revered father, H.D. Shourie, who I used to look upon literally as a father figure, one day called me 2 days before I was returning to New York, and he asked me, "Pawan, what happened to your book?" And I said, "Uncle, I don't think anybody is interested. I'm going back." And he said to me, "Why don't you meet Khushwant?" And I said, "I don't know him." He said, "I'll just call him. You call this number half an hour later." And I called Khushwant Singh as advised by Mr. H.D. Shourie, and there was a gruff voice at the end of the phone which said, "Kal 10:30 baje aa jana subah." And it was January, very cold, and when I entered his Sujan Singh Park home, the sight that greeted me was him on an easy chair with a blanket right up to his neck almost, with 2 heaters on both sides of the chair. And to my great surprise, he was reading my manuscript, which had been given to him by his son-in-law Ravi Dayal, who was also looking for it and was then managing editor of Oxford University Press. And that's when he told me, "मुझको तुम्हारी किताब बहुत पसंद आ रही है. Penguin आने वाला है इंडिया में. I am the consulting editor. I will give it not to OUP, I will give it to Penguin." And I by then was so disappointed. I said, "Saab Sabzbag na dikhiye. Aapko pasand aaye to send me a letter, or just let me know you enjoyed it." And I left, and 6 months later, he did what he had promised. The book was published. It must be now in its 54th edition, published in every Indian language. And the whole process began because of Khushwant Singh, and I want to publicly record my deep, deep gratitude to him for that. Since then, there have been many books, but since this is a panel discussion, I have a lot to say about what he would have felt at India at 70. I can stop here and then join the debate later. And then I'll come back because I think that India at 70 for Khushwant Singh, he would have been happier at India at 50. And you must understand, from my point of view, who is at a certain cusp in politics, that I am not speaking with my political hat on. What I will say is what I believe in, irrespective of who is in power or what the power equation is or should be or can be or will be. I will speak as an individual here, as indeed Khushwant Singh always did. So there are some comments I need to make, but I'll stop here if you like, and then continue.
Good afternoon, everybody. For me, this is a kind of a surreal moment. I have known Khushwant ji since the year 2000, which is when I first met him. I had gone to see him at his Sujan Singh Park residence with my first manuscript, and he was in fact the first one who actually read it. It was a book called Father Dearest, a biography of R.K. Dalmia, my father. And after that, I'm going to read out a small passage of what I wrote when Khushwant ji died, about how I met him and that encounter. But before I read that, I want to tell you that I have this voice in my ear now, which resounded each and every day, in which he used to say, "Ladki, tera kuch nahi ho sakta. Tu sharab nahi piti, tu gosht nahi khati, aur ishq tu kar nahi sakti." So that is the abiding memory I have of him. And if you allow me to, may I just read this? I won't make it long. I'll just read out the nice, crisp beginning. It's a large room filled with hundreds of books and artifacts. A pile of the day's newspapers is stacked in a corner. A few scattered chairs, an old coffee table, a weather recliner, a rocking chair, a red brick fireplace with a crackling logwood fire, and him sitting beside it, sipping scotch and soda in a tall ice-filled glass. There's a large oil canvas of a bare-breasted woman on the wall facing him. She has spent many winters looking upon him, who watches and admires her. And that is the abiding memory I have of Khushwant ji, that larger-than-life man who worshipped female beauty, who was an ardent devotee of the sensuous female body form, and who never shied away from proclaiming that life was meaningless unless you lived it with love and passion. Passionate about his work to a level of challenging perfection, he broke every rule in the book and lived up to his metaphor, unmindful of social mores, for he was a man who feared none. A staunch agnostic, he wrote his mind and spoke with rare candor that defined his very being. Loved and abhorred with equal passion, his life reads like an open, racy novel that needs no elucidation. So I went with my manuscript to Khushwant ji because my mother told me I hadn't signed up with any publisher then. And she said because he had known my father well, and he had been editor of the Illustrated Weekly when my father owned the Times of India. And she said that the greatest validation you will get of your work is if Khushwant ji reads it and says it's okay to go with it. So he looked at me with a little bit of contempt and he said, another syrupy book about deifying your father. Oh, these Indian women, when will they ever get out of that? It makes me ill. I hope you haven't deified him. And I just smiled and I said, if you read it, you will know, because the title is a bit deceptive. So he said, let me read it and I'll get back to you. And then I went home with the greatest trepidation. I didn't know what to expect. A first-time writer who had no knowledge of whether I was good or bad or acceptable or trashy. And after about 4 or 5 days, which I spent like sitting on pins and needles, I got no call from him and I couldn't contain myself. And I called him and I said, so have you been able to read the book? And he said, don't bother me now, I'm in the stock market. And I said, pardon, stock market? He said, your book, I'm in the middle of your book. And there's a huge chapter of the stock market and futures trading in which my father had lost and made a lot of money. And so I said, so do you like it? And he said, oh, stop fishing, woman. Call me later. It's absolutely riveting. And that was, I think, perhaps the most exciting moment of my life. For that was the validation from the man who I had held in iconic respect since I was a little girl. And then he went on to write the blurb for it. He mentioned it in his column. And of course, the book went on to be a bestseller. Thank you. I have many other anecdotes, but then I'll go in turn. Yeah.
I have actually no anecdotes about Khushwant Singh, whom I didn't know at all. But I met him once or twice, and he also actually wrote something rather kind about me in one of his columns, inadvertently, I think. So I'm actually, and I didn't, through growing up and reading, I didn't actually read much of Khushwant Singh apart from his columns, and I didn't think much of him as a writer. In fact, he once came to St. Stephen's and said as much, that he thought he himself was a second-rate writer. And, but it's only much later when I began to actually read some of his books given to me by Mala, that I realized that this was actually not true, that he may not be writing like Proust with long sentences, but he had a certain directness of style and a certain directness of personality which revealed him in the pages that I read. And I got interested in this idea of this literary festival, and when I was asked, I don't know really why, to join this panel, I wanted to look at his writings on religion. Because here is somebody who claims he's an atheist. Reason for him, he says, is supreme. And yet he spends a lot of time talking about religion, he writes, and he quotes extensively from the texts. He maintains a Sikh identity, despite, pouring scorn sometimes on people, as he says, jo matha bahut zor se tekte hain, Gurdware mein, they carry the greatest sins often on their heads. So what was it exactly about this ambiguity that he had with religion? So I looked at, Agnostic Khushwant and certain other writings of his. And so I want to share some of those thoughts with you. Now, at the age of 97, when he brings out this book of his, Freethinker's Prayer Book, which is a series of quotations that he's gathered over the years of his own and from others who visited him. I think there must be some inputs from Vikram Seth here, because I noticed there were quotations from Chinese poetry as well. There he says that he has no illusions about death. He doesn't think that there is any God or afterlife or rebirth awaiting him, and he's quite willing to face the void. With equanimity, he's lived his life, and it's time, and this is at 97. So why did he write so much about religion then? And why translate so many religious works? Now I have 2 or 3 ideas about this. One is, of course, as a journalist, because in this country religion plays a very prominent role in our lives, he could not help but deal with it. And there also, I think, as we know, that he looks at the sort of uglier face of religion rather than its spiritual or meditative. He's skeptical about maybe some of the ideas about and notions of God, but he certainly rejects the kind of faux religiosity that seems to pervade our country, and he's aware of that. And he seems to be one of the few people who writes regularly denouncing things like processions, loudspeakers, and the sort of religious noise that we have got used to, which most of us, of course, just ignore. We don't want to confront it. It's a nuisance. We don't actually believe in these things. But, there's not much that we can do about them. He actually wrote about them. So from that point of view, he also had denounced Asaram, Ram Rahim, and would have been very happy today to know that they had got some of their just desserts. I think, however, that his translation as an interest in religious literature should characterize him as really what I would call a religious atheist. So he was an atheist, but he was also religious. And I think the fact that he said that he had no interest in religion is a bit like his saying that he was only interested in sex. He wasn't really actually only interested in sex. Similarly, he was not really disinterested in religion. And this comes out repeatedly in his writings about other people, about humanity, about the beauty of the Quran, which he says that he made numerous attempts to read, including working with Arabic commentators, listening to the readings of the Quran on the radio, working with translations. He spent obviously a lot of time. What reason did he give? Why did he want to spend so much time reading this text? I think partly because of the beauty of some of its verses, and also because he felt that it was important to understand the mind of a whole people that invested so much of their lives in one book. Because the book was important to Muslims, he felt that it was important for him to get some handle or bearing on it. In fact, although he warns us that, cave homine unictus libri, that is, beware of the man with one book, he spent a lot of time trying to read that book. Similarly, his translations from the Adi Granth and from the Sikh prayers are full of an idea of, I think, a kind of moral universe that he thought, if not, it didn't exist, at least ought to exist. And I think that is something about what brought him close to God in that way. Therefore, I think Khushwant Singh was also touched upon what is called the transcendent aspect of religion, something that is better than this world and beyond this world. Although he wasn't a religious historian, didn't write about spirituality or meditation in that way. He in fact talks about yoga, dismisses it in some forms, accepts the idea of prayer as something that is useful even though there is no God that it is actually addressed to. So why did he read the poets so much? I think because, again, it is only in the Indian context that within the poets, particularly in the Bhakti movement, that you actually get a critique of religion, a critique of the formalism, ritualism, the so-called outward religiosity. And this is probably what attracted him, maybe, to some of those verses which he quotes so regularly in his works. I'd like to end this with a quote that he gives, in fact, from Iqbal, ढूंढता फिरता हूँ इकबाल अपने आप को, आप ही गोया मुसाफिर, आप ही मंजिल हूँ मैं. So here was a man who was in search actually of himself. Thank you.
Coming through? The sound is coming through, yeah, I think that was beautiful. That my father, he was a man who studied all the religions despite saying that he was an atheist. But religion fascinated him. Ritual he hated. He used to love to say, work is worship, worship is not work. So that was one. And then, in his study in Kasoli here, which is just as it was when he used to work there, there are pictures of two people there whom he admired most. And they're both people of faith. One was Mahatma Gandhi and the second was Mother Teresa. And he wrote a very nice, he went to see Mother Teresa in Calcutta and he wrote a very long, very touching piece on her in the New York Times. And she replied to him, thanking him for that piece. And that letter is framed there. And she ends off by saying, I am told that you do not believe in God. I send you God's blessings. Which was so touching, I thought.
Yeah, he says he has framed it in a silver frame and it's in his house in Kasoli.
It's in the study, yeah.
Can I just take this from here? So I do not believe that Khushwant didn't believe in God. And I had many arguments with this about him. And I once told him that you're a closet believer. You just like to say that you don't believe in God, but deep down inside you do believe in God. And of course, he always did. I couldn't validate my argument, but that didn't stop me from endless arguments that I do believe in God. And I told him once about an astrologer. I said, when I was 9, he told me that you're going to write many books. And he said, usko pehle se tera pata hoga ki tu kuch likhti hai, to aise hi tukka lag gaya uska. Wo kahan hai? Itna bada astrologer hai, to kyun nahi prime minister ban gaya ho? So he dismissed it with that. But I once asked him, and I'll just end this with that and give it to Pawan. I said, are you afraid of death? And he narrated to me an incident because he had this blatant mockery of death and this devil may care attitude of life, which we all encountered in some way or the other. And he narrated an incident which I think you'll remember, that he fell very ill much before he actually passed away. And he said that when I woke up, after came out of that bout of illness, he said, I wrote this in one of his columns. He quoted a couplet of Allama Iqbal, and if I'm saying it wrong, please correct me, Pawan. बागे बहिश्त से हमें हुक्मे सफर दिया था क्यों, कारे जहां दराज है अब मेरा इंतजार कर. So he actually, it loosely translated, that was like a mockery to God, in which he says that, why did you send me out of the Garden of Eden? Now I have a lot to do. Now you will have to wait for me to call me back. So it reaffirmed my belief, which I told him, is that you're talking to God. How can you say you don't believe in God? Over to you. And he was a man who lived in the here and now. So I don't know what he would have said of India in the 70s, because I don't think his stand would have changed even an iota on what he felt.
You can discuss Khushwant Singh at the anecdotal level, because each anecdote is probably better than the last. And everyone has their anecdotes. We have so many. Or you can perhaps try to judge him in terms of his belief structure in the context of his times then and their relevance today. Which is a slightly more difficult task, because the sheer flow of the anecdotes can just take you and keep the audience far more entertained. In my view, Khushwant Singh was an iconoclast. Ghalib has said, "Qasid hu apni qaul ka, Ghalib khuda gawah." Qasid hu apni qaul ka, Ghalib khuda gawah. Kehta hu sach ki jhoot ki aadat nahi mujhe. Now, that was his approach to most things, irrespective of whether they would be taken to be either popular, condemned, criticized or otherwise. He stated what he believed in. And I want to say to you that at the level of technology, he lived on the periphery of almost every change that technology has brought in. I mean, I was High Commissioner in Cyprus many, many years ago. I used to regularly receive postcards from him. Who sends postcards to Cyprus? But that, Khushwant Singh only wrote postcards and things like that. He lived, but in an age where artificial intelligence was gaining, he had an inbuilt intelligence of the observer. He could observe what is wrong, and I would venture to say that his was a house, which outside, if I'm not mistaken, Rahul had a board which said, please don't ring the bell if you are not expected. But today, it's still there, but I will say that even if Kalburgi had put that board up, the bell would have rung. And Kalburgi would have come to the door and would have been shot for no other reason than I disagree with you. And if in today's time, if I have to remember Khushwant Singh, I have to see him for the fact that probably for the views he held on the extreme spectrums of all kinds of fundamentalisms in the area of religion, for the views he believed in terms of what should be patriotism and my ability to define it for myself, and for the views that he held with regard to freedom of dissent, and for the views he held on morality and my choice to live my life in the manner that I wish to, he would have been collectively either shot, God forbid, or accused of sedition, certainly accused of being anti-national, and would have been today living under, if he accepted it, a great amount of security. This is why Khushwant Singh and what he said is relevant today, and we need to ponder about it. As I said, I am not speaking out of the political head, but if a person who holds a particular point of view, which was he inventing this tradition of iconoclasm? 1200 years before him, and I'm writing a book on him, so everybody knows these Adi Shankaracharya. Adi Shankaracharya could say, na main rag dvesh, na main moha lobha, mado neva main neva matsarya bhava, na dharmo, na chartho, na kamo, na moksha. He denied all the four purusharthas of Hinduism. He said there is no dharma, there is no earth, there is no kam, there is not even salvation. Only one thing matters. Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivo. Bliss and awareness. I am Shiva. Saying, I am Shiva, I am Shiva. So it's not a new tradition. It's a tradition where we have held the fact. After all, 1200 years ago, there could be the resolution of a discussion on the basis of a Shastrarth. The whole thing was a debate, a discussion, an argument, where you could agree to disagree. And Khushwant Singh, in many ways, for many of those who did not agree with him, epitomized that mood. If he was lectured on patriotism and what it should be, or on communalism, he could say, "Sabhi ka khoon shamil hai yahan ki mitti mein. Kisi ke baap ka Hindustan thodi hai." He could say it. He could say it and he could put it. So I am not saying that he had great faith in India also. He believed that merely because he could speak, he could write, he could talk, he could hold an opinion, India can never go down, and I endorse that point of view. India will survive, India will remain, but the challenge is before us. And there is no point paying tribute to Khushwant Singh if we forget the fact that over and above the deliberately somewhat superficial image he loved to project about himself, Rat Peen Peg Whiskey, this, that, he was an exceptionally disciplined man with a core belief in what should constitute the idea of India. Can we respect that? Do we have the courage to follow it? He dedicates a festival to the soldier, and at the same time he retains his right as an Indian citizen to ask a question which relates to perhaps the defense of the country. without being afraid that he could be called anti-national merely because he asked that question. And that is the challenge which I think Khushwant best epitomizes and we have to face today. Thank you.
You know, what I'd like to do now is to throw the, all of us are talking about Khushwant Singh. Are there any questions which any of us you feel could answer? Because we would like to, as much as possible, as time permits, to have a question and answer session towards the end of every session. So is there anybody who would like to say something or ask any questions? Please. I think we'll need a mic for, can we get a mic for anybody who...
So many of you praise Khushwant Singh justly, I think, for his... Hello, can you hear me now? So many of you praise Khushwant Singh justly, I think, for his outspokenness and what we call his iconoclasty. But I wonder whether his elite status, in terms of his, let's say, his wealth or the way he was very closely familiar with the political masters or the powerful people, was there a factor in him being fearless? And did that make him say the things that he did? Because he knew if there were any consequences, he would not really be in trouble.
Let me answer that.
Can you repeat the question?
He wasn't a kind of elite kind of person. He led a very fairly simple life. He was well off, there's no doubt, but he led a simple life. He's, as I think Ashok Chopra earlier said, he's the kind of person who could, he was a great communicator. He could, there's a Kipling phrase which says, he could walk with kings, yet had the common touch. And I'll give you a small, Pawan mentioned about him sending postcards. He used to spend a large part of the day writing to everybody who wrote to him and replying to them in postcards. Ashok Chopra wrote one how he sent the SGBC postcard saying go to hell. But he used to write in very bad handwriting postcards to everybody who wrote to him. I once was in, I'm talking about the 1970s, I was some village down south somewhere in a car. I was taking my then girlfriend around the south, and the car broke down and found a mechanic. We found a mechanic who was repairing the car. And while I was repairing the car, people got to know that I'm Khushwant Singh's son. And then one retired Jawan got very excited. He says, can you wait a moment, can you wait a moment? He went running into his small hut and he came out proudly showing a postcard that my father had written to him. So I was really touched by that. So, and he was in danger at one time, at the time when he was criticizing Bhindranwale and the Punjab terrorists. Ved Marwa was then the police commissioner, and the police had put a 24-hour security thing outside. And he said once to Ved Marwa, what is this, security? I don't need any security and all that. And then it so happened that there were two Sikh terrorists who were planning to assassinate him. And they were caught in time, luckily. Ved Marwa came to the house and showed my father the diagram that they had of the entries and exits from his flat. So he was in danger at one time. Any more questions there? Pawan, do you want to say anything or not? Pawan,
I'm sorry to interrupt this, but there's an urgent announcement. There's a car Audi 1666. It's a UP number 1666 that needs to be removed immediately from there. It's blocking everything and traffic has come to a halt there. 1666 UP number and Audi. Pawan, please continue.
I just wanted to say that your point is valid. That many times people who are in a relative position of privilege and know that they can, if they wish, pull a certain degree, number of levers to further insulate themselves from what would normally befall somebody much lower as a common person. Yes, but equally there were many more opportunities for him, being where he was, to benefit from the system. Because so many more doors were also open to him to go from beyond merely being a columnist. Now, somewhere you have to make a choice. And I think that in my view, apart from that one aberration which was referred to with regard to the emergency, where I'm sure it was guided by conviction, but that conviction was misdirected. But in my view, that through this situation, irrespective of whatever personal attributes he had in terms of wealth, position, status, power, privilege, here was a person who by and large said, when he took that pen and used to write his columns and not write on the computer, who said, जो लिखूंगा तो वो लिखूंगा जिसमें मैं यकीन करता हूं. ये अपने आप में आज बहुत बड़ी बात है.
Yeah, point to that is, of course, if more people who are in positions of wealth and privilege spoke like Khushwant Singh, maybe our country would be a different place.
There are actually two people here who knew my father very well. One is Sheila Reddy, I think she's somewhere around. She's going to have a session later. And one is Vikram Seth here. My father used to often say that Vikram is going to be a future Nobel Prize winner. He admired him immensely, and though everybody else had to make an appointment, if Vikram wanted to see my dad, he just walked into the room at drinks time and he was welcomed straight away. Vikram, is anything you want to say, or Sheila Reddy, anything you would like to say?
I think I'm speaking tomorrow at some time. I'm not quite sure when. So I haven't sort of collected my Khushwant Singh anecdotes. For me, he was just such a wonderful presence, and someone who for all the fact that people admired him so much, was so light-hearted in spirit. And yet one did notice on almost any momentous matter that he had what was it Pawan said, that a very, very clear and serious idea of how one should behave in life in general, what the idea of India was in general, and how important it was to have the correct level of scotch in your glass. Well, I loved him, and maybe when I speak tomorrow, I'll think tonight about specific incidents, but none really that I.
Okay, Rahul, I think we are running out of time now, so we'll have to go on to the next session. Thank you so much, Rahul, Pawan Bhai, Vijay, and Nilima. Thank you so much for being here. That was great, absolutely. Before we move on to the next session, I have a couple of announcements to make. All of you who have got the program, the schedule for this fest, please do note that there are a few changes we have had to make because some of the authors have fallen sick and they couldn't make it at the last minute. And we have also to announce that books of all these authors who are here are available in the bookshop. So please do have a look and do have them autographed from your favorite authors. Now the change in the schedule is that a lot of people have been asking me as to when is Vikram going to speak. Well, he is speaking tomorrow at 5 o'clock. He's not listed in the schedule because Vikram had made me promise him that it will not be announced. And that is not for any other reason because of his father's health, whether he would be able to make it or not, and the health of his manuscript that he is working on at this stage. But luckily, 2 days before, he did say, and he said, I'll come. We'll talk about that tomorrow. So he's here, and we are very happy that he is here after 6 years. Today, at about 3 o'clock, 3:10 to be precise, we have a special session with Divya Dutta, who's going to talk to Alka Pandey out here. I think both of them are here. So these are the 2 changes, and after that, the flow continues, but Neelima's session with Ashutosh is going to be at 5:45 onwards. 5:45 onwards. And once again, Vikram will be speaking tomorrow at 5 o'clock. And it is all only because of Vikram that he's not listed in the schedule, because he made me promise that. But we are very happy to have him. So 5 o'clock. And now we move on to the next session, Erotica. And the title is Karma and the Difficulty of Doing Good. May we have on the stage the one and only Shobha Dey. Divya Dutta. Divya. Amrita Narayanan. Amrita is here?
Yes.
Where is Amrita? There she is. She is. Come on. Hey, wait for a photograph with me also. And Anand Padmanabhan. Anand Padmanabhan. Is he here? Anand, yes, there he is. Come play with me, Anand. Anand Padmanabhan and the moderator, Alka Pandey.
Rahul.
Alka, can you take over, please?
Hello, good afternoon, namaskar, everyone here. I'm actually delighted to be on this panel because we do need karma in these difficult times, in these days of huge polarization. We need love. I'm really so grateful to Rahul and Nilüfer for including this panel, to Ashok Chopra for bringing in such a diverse set of multi-vocal voices from India, because India is about multivocality. India is about cultural diversity. There is so much about karma that I want to say, but I'll try and limit myself. There will be lots of things which I'll forget, but I have my very wonderful panel here, which is spanning decades of writing and also generations, also practices. All I can say is that I've been in pursuit of calm for the last 20 years. 2 years ago, I did a wonderful exhibition in Paris, which was called The Erotic and the Spiritual, the Kama Sutra. And this is how I want to actually place karma. It is definitely the erotic, it is definitely the spiritual, it is definitely about living and living life well. It is about pleasure. Nowhere in the world is calm so deeply invested in the myths and legends of the nation. And India is a land of 1,000 languages, millions of gods, and each of our gods has a consort. There is no question of guilt. And how did actually the origins of calm start? One of the many myths is that when Nandi heard the
lovemaking of Jagatapitaru Vande Shiva Parvati. He kind of translated it and gave it to Vatsayan. But there is yet another story that the Kama Sutra consists of 7 books and 36 chapters. The first book is on Dharma, which has 5 chapters. The second book is on sexual union, and that is the only thing which people look at. The absolute sexo-yogic positions, and people want to try those positions, but that's only one book. And yes, it does have 10 chapters. The third book is about the maiden, which is 5 chapters. The 5th book is about the wife, which is about 2 chapters. The 5th book is about other women and other people's wives. So you see patriarchy, of course, but men have always been lusting after other men's wives. The 6th book is about the courtesan, a very, very important book, which has 6 chapters, and it really shows how wonderful a woman is. How do you milk a wealthy lover? How do you get rid of an unwelcome lover? How are you, well versed in the 64 arts of Shringar? And then, of course, there's a chapter on Aphrodisiacs. Being a woman, and I think all my women panelists will agree, women don't need to fake it. But men cannot even fake it. So these are very important aspects of the Kama Sutra. The Kama Sutra was written about the 4th century, and there have been lots of books which have taken inspiration, and I think people are still writing about it. Divya is emoting about it. Shobha is not only commentating, but has written extensively. Amrita is carrying on. And Anand, who I think is very, very brave, the only man in our panel, has also written an extremely sexy novel, but is it karma or is it sex? So these are various things which we will discuss, but I'll just take 5 minutes more to go back really into the etymology of karma. Karma is very much about desire. Kama has a consort called Rati, and I love to play with Rati Krida, because if you look at all our gods, there's Ganesh with Riddhi and Siddhi, there is Vishnu and Lakshmi. Each god has a consort. So Kama, the mind-born son of Brahma, has a lovely, lovely goddess called Rati, who is the goddess of desire and arousal, and he actually is brought back to life by her beseeching Shiva to bring him back to life, because though he was born out of the mind of Brahma, the first person he threw his arrows of love was at Brahma and the Prajapatis. And it was strange, but the stirrings of desire which the Prajapatis and others felt was on Brahma's daughter Sandhya, the goddess of twilight, the goddess of dawn. And Shiva was passing by and watching all this Leela, and he laughed. And therefore, from the perspiration of Daksha was created Rati, and she was presented to Kama as his wife. But Sandhya was so upset that she committed suicide, and Brahma cursed his mind-born son to die. But later, Rati beseeched him, and he was reincarnated as the son of Krishna and Rukmini as Manmatha. So there are lots of stories, but the thing is that Kama, without Kama, we can't live, because even in the Kama Sutra, it's Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. Until you don't go through these 4 balances, if you don't know what is your Dharma, you cannot even earn Artha the right way. And how do you enjoy Artha if you have not witnessed Kama? So I just want to read 2 very small haikus from the Gatha Sapatis of Hala, the Andhra poet, which said, which is very interesting, these 4 lines: live in mainstream, attractive young, her husband away, a light wench, her neighbor hard up too, and unbelievably still chaste. Another little verse from the same book, from the same anthology. Bookish lovemaking is soon repetitive style. It's the improved style which wins my heart. And the Gatha Saptatis were written mainly by men. There were 231 men who wrote, but 5 to 7 of them were women. And I think at this point I will ask my young panelist, Amrita Narayanan, whose latest book, Parrots of Desire, has just been published, and would she talk about the good of pleasure?
Thank you, Alka. Can you hear me? Yes. So my engagement with Kama comes primarily from Indian erotic literature. And my new book, The Parrots of Desire, tries to showcase the Indian erotic literature, which I don't think we know as well as we might. For me, the big discovery in this book was, of course, the Kama Sutra, but beyond that, the Gatha Saptasai, which Alka just mentioned, the Tamil Sangam poets, and the Aphrodisiacs, which is a 7th century Kashmiri Sanskrit book of erotic verses. As I went through the historical breadth of erotic literature, what I felt very strongly is that there are two kamas. One is kama for conservatives. Conservatives have an erotically anxious approach to kama. They say, yes, kama is important, but let him be within the 4 aims of life. Keep it contained, because kama causes a lot of chaos. The romantics say, bring it on. Let's have as much of kama as we possibly can. And the nature of kama is uncontainment, so we must abide with its chaoticness. I felt that growing up in India, the voice of dharma, the containment of kama, the erotic anxiety when it comes to kama is very strongly narrativized. The early religious texts, including the Rig Veda and onwards, for the first probably 800 years of my volume, speak strongly about the cautionary nature and approach that we must take to kama. But then starting in the 2nd century, there's a very wonderful outpouring of literary romantic work that invites to make the psychological leap that we need to make in order to enjoy kama. So I'm going to read just bits for us. And I'm hoping that these will give you an idea of what I mean when I say there's very particular psychological qualities that allow us to enjoy kama, including surrendering to things that normally in the grand narrative of dharma, we shouldn't normally surrender to these things. If we're pursuing artha, if we're pursuing dharma, we have to maintain a certain stability of mind, a certain equanimity and constancy. Well, the writers of the Gatha Saptasai, the Aphrodisiacs, and the Tamil Sangam are against equanimity, as it were, in the moment of kama. They suggest instead to embrace something different. From the Tamil Sangam, love's fondness. If it be strength to shake off love and kindness and depart in pursuit of wealth, leaving us to languish, let him be strong, and let us women be fools in our fondness. And this one is from the Aphrodisiacs, which is a poem that allows us to see how lovely it can be to surrender. When my face turned towards his, I averted it and looked at my feet. When my ears clamored to hear his talk, I stopped them. When my cheeks broke out in sweat and goosebumps, I covered them with my hands. But friends, when the seams of my bodice burst in 100 places, what could I do? What I think is very lovely about these ancient texts is that they invite us into helplessness, shame. There's a very beautiful Tamil Sangam poem that says, we are all out for shame when we are in the mood of kama. And this psychological openness to kama runs very contrary to the control, the dominance, the money-making, and the focus that we are invited to also bring forth in the other aims of life. So what I wanted to promote in this book, and as you read through the centuries of voices, is that pleasure has its own purpose, and to surrender to pleasure, to cede to it, we have to have this very particular frame of mind in which the qualities that could be so agitating to us at other moments, such as distraction, gazing at all around us instead of focusing on what we're doing, could become suddenly quite beautiful and useful. And the very text from the Kama Sutra, the Katha Saptasai, to the Amarusadaka, and numerous other texts in between, including the Bhakti poets, will invite you into your shame, your helplessness, your distraction, and show you how beautiful they are. So, thank you.
Thank you, Amrita. But we are actually not pursuing any kind of guilt or shame. We are here today as Hedons, celebrating the joyousness of the pleasure of living. And for this, I would now like to, but thank you very much for reading such lovely idealized poetry, Amrita. I'd like to come to my wonderful panelist, Shobha De. She has a huge CV, which I don't want to bore all of you. I'm sure we can all look into and dip into our little Google things. But definitely, I'd like to say that she is India's most trusted people, as Reader's Digest said, and one of the 50 most powerful women in India. So let us, So let us understand, Shobha, how you have looked at sexuality, at pleasure, at relationships. You were perhaps one of the first contemporary women writers to write about it in Starry Nights and Sisters, in the way you have attempted it.
Thank you, and I'd just like to say this about the festival, because it is indeed very, very special. I think it's the only festival, literary festival in the world, which honors, at that point, a living author. It's the only festival which is named for a writer and honored his work and the works of writers to come. So, Kasoli, Ashok, Rahul, Nilufar, the entire team behind the Kasoli Lit Fest, it's a gem of a festival, and each one of us needs to support it, because without our support, the festival is on slightly fragile grounds, with sponsors pulling out at the last minute, and corporates worried about the content of Lit Fest and what they can possibly say to the informed. And since India at this point at 70 is so afraid of minds, it's important that we have festivals like this where we can speak our minds and be heard. About my own work, and I've listened to both of you, the word Kama is a beautiful word, but the Kama Sutra itself is the biggest con I've ever come across. And I'm so glad it originates in India, the Kama Sutra, because the rest of the world thinks all of us have wild and wonderful sex as it's projected in the Kama Sutra. But if we were to even attempt half of those asanas, we'd be breaking our knees, our necks, and God knows which other body part, damaging it seriously. So I love the idea that it's a book full of trickery and that it continues to inspire people to try all those asanas. And I hope the West continues to get fooled by the idea of how Indians enjoy sex. The idea of enjoyment, pleasure, guilt is intrinsically built into all cultures, not just our culture. The very idea of sex is threatening and frightening. Sex, the three-letter word, is as terrifying as another three-letter word, God. So when you're trying to connect the two, I doubt it that when we're in the throes of passion, we're actually thinking spiritual and we're thinking God. At least I can speak for myself. That's the last thing on my mind is a spiritual high. Different sort of pleasure, definitely. But I'm not thinking about God. You know, you don't lie back and think of God at that moment. It's a good attempt for us in India and in our mythologies to try and link the two. But perhaps the texts are so intellectually evolved and so not available and accessible to the average mind that when we try and analyze and deconstruct sex along those lines and the mythology and the erotic poets, we sometimes miss out on the basics. We have a tradition of great erotic poetry written by Telugu women, poets, many, many centuries ago, which we have kind of lost touch with and forgotten. I think what they're trying to remind us about is just the sensuous aspect of sexuality and sex, which we often forget. But in the context of this festival being about India at 70, it's also important to say that the perverted notion of sexuality and sex that we live with, the hypocrisy that we deal with, must also be acknowledged at Shishi Lit Fest. When we think about the rapes, when we think about even a Ram Rahim kind of person or Asaram, the kind of values that are being projected as being culturally acceptable values, the idea to try and appropriate a large section of our people and brainwash them into thinking about sex as being somehow dirty, at the same time not having the guts to condone violence in the name of sex. How can any rapist, how can we talk karma to a rapist? What pleasure are they getting raping a defenseless woman? What pleasure do they get in sodomizing a little boy, of brutally attacking a little girl, even babies? This is the culture we are talking about. This is the sexuality we actually need to talk about, because this is what is of a much bigger concern than lying in bed and not thinking of God. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shobha, and I think it's an important kind of inroads into the Kama Sutra, but I'm going to go back a little bit back again in time, being wedded to Indian aesthetics myself, and talk to our lovely actress here, Divya. One of the sthai bhavs of Kama, or you know, the kind of understanding of desire, is the whole immersive experience, and the biggest ras is the Shringar ras. So, Divya, in the number of roles that you've done, and you've done a diverse set of roles, how do you kind of play with the whole aspect of sexuality? How do you kind of emote with the audience behind the camera? Because there are layers through which, when you are emoting, it's translated to the audience. It is your own human act captured through the lens, through the moving lens, through many layers, and then through the celluloid and through the screen. How is it that you kind of bring it as an immersive experience?
First of all, a very good afternoon, and really like to thank Khushwant Singh Lit Fest for inviting me here. Ashok ji, Rahul ji, and I had a lovely bond with Khushwant Singh ji, thanks to Train to Pakistan. And I remember I had gone to his house, and that thing was outside. Only ring the bell if you're invited. And I was like, am I invited? Yes, I am. And I sat with him, and we chatted about poetry, and that's when I really got along well with him. And one thing I'd like to just say about him, just off the record, kuch unjli rawa aukhiyan san, kuch dil vich gam da tokh vi si, kuch sheher de log vi zalim san, kuch sanu maran da shauq vi si. So that was him. And I had a lovely experience with him, and Ashok ji was there, and we reconnected at another Lit Fest. We were premiering Train to Pakistan in one of the villages in Punjab, and Khushwant ji was sitting right next to me, and he said, "Hun dekhi ki hunda?" So I was like, "Ki hunda?" He's saying, "Bas tu dekh." So there were speeches and everything about Train to Pakistan being a patriotic film. And the moment the film started, it was a love-making scene. There was pin-drop silence in the audience. And one by one, a lot of people who were politically connected just went off because they thought that was not the right thing. And what I saw Khushwant ji do was he was laughing because he knew this was going to happen. What I feel, what I'm going to talk about is that, as you rightly said, we are layered when we talk about karma. Be it movies, be it in our real lives. We love to see it, but it has to be layered. I've seen different times. I came in the 90s. And before that, I think, the good girl was somebody who wouldn't really kiss or wouldn't do romance. A vamp could do that, but not the heroine, because she had a good girl image. The hero couldn't, a villain could. And you got your fantasies out of that. Gradually, I mean, we had those phoolon ka romance hota tha, jahan par phool aa gaye, and this is symbolic, you get what you have to imagine. I think gradually what happened is we did start showing things the way they were. And for me also, just from dancing around the trees, I was given scenes, first of all in Train to Pakistan. There was a kissing scene I had with Mohan Agashe, and I was all of 17 and I didn't know how to kiss. And I remember Pamela Rooks was right there, and she was frustrated that I didn't know how to kiss. And she went and just kissed Mohan Agashe and said, "This is how you do it." And I was loving the way she was so blatant about it, and I got the confidence to just go ahead and do it, because they were taking a scene for what it was, for what it had to portray, and not being layered for just anybody's comfort. I was at a press conference for this film of mine called Badlapur with Varun Dhawan, and the first thing that the press asked Varun was, "How was it kissing Divya?" Hello. So everything else was aside. What was very interesting for them, and curiosity, and wanting to know more, is hiding behind, but not saying it directly, is talking about these things, but not being straight about it. So I think we've learned how to layer it out. We'll talk about these long love-making scenes. You talk about any films that I did, probably his with Irfan Khan. They'll talk about them, but they won't be direct about it. There's a certain shyness, there's a certain inhibition that they have, and they will not come straight out of it. But now I think there are films where people are talking about sexuality, about the sensual stuff, about women wanting and desiring sex and love, and wanting to be caressed and loved the way they would want, and they're direct about it. And there are films showing that, be it Anishkia and be it so many other films that I don't remember. Women are being very outspoken about what they want, and that I think has now become a welcome change. You probably see a Bareilly Ki Barfi where a woman is saying, "Listen, I want it." And there's so many others you cite examples on. So this is a gradual change. You have an Anurag Kashyap, you have that group of directors who are saying things the way they are. But still I feel with the audience that you have, they still feel slightly apprehensive about, yet they love it, but they are not accepting of the fact that, we love to love it. So I think that little thing is coming. We are seeing that change coming in. As far as me being an actor and connecting with these roles, I come from Punjab, very inhibited. I started with, everything was G for me, very protected background. When I went into movies, they said, "Uthi nahi kudiyan jandiyan, you don't go. Good girls don't go there." And but I landed there. There was a conviction that once you're an actor, once you're portraying a role, you become that, and whatever that is. And I think a very, very good director told me, when you look at the camera, you make love to it. And every time I go in front of the camera, I say, "Hey, you and I are going to make love." So for me, that is karma, in whichever way that is, whichever role I portray. And all the inhibitions just go when you're portraying a role, be it Milkha's sister being physically abused by her husband in that direction, or be it a love-making scene that I do, or a kissing scene I do. I think the inhibitions just lay aside. What remains is me and the camera, and the comfort I feel with it.
Wonderful. Okay. There's an announcement.
And the entire traffic, please, MH20, I think it's the Maharashtra number 20, number of the car is 620. 620, whoever owns it, please have it removed immediately, because there's massive chaos outside. A lot of people wanting to come in and they can't, or they have to move on. Number is MH20 BY620. Please remove the car. Thank you.
That's okay. Now I think after this really wonderful personal kind of interaction with Kam, with the moving lens, your own self, cinema, and I think the power of Indian cinema is one of the most powerful social interactions we have. Thank you very much, Divya, for that. I come to my friend and the only male in our panel, Anant. Anant has written a book about 3 years ago called Play With Me. I've known Anant for a while now, and I saw him as a very hard-nosed marketing person. He's now the CEO of HarperCollins. He's a very smart mind. And then to have this book called Play With Me, which was very much about a young man and the changing kind of relationships which young people have today. I come from a different generation, and when I read the book, I mean, I was first and foremost amazed because it was a stark representation of ardor and passion, which, as Divya has just said, that we all love to relate with. But I think somewhere in us, in spite of this great bhakti tradition that we've had, all kinds of things, whether it's Victorian prudery or wherever the change happened, we have become extremely, how should I say, the political correctness, or even with ourselves, our culturization, or the way we've been brought up to mask our feelings somewhere, it really made me sit up. And I just wanted to ask Anant, what prompted him to, with his vast years of experience in publishing, was it that sex sells that he wrote the book? Was it because of his because I'm sure the book must have sold very well, because I really, believe you me, couldn't put it down. It was a crackling storytelling style, very Delhi-based, very Gurgaon-based, very metropolis-based. And it talked also of a young woman who kind of was finding herself and found herself and did exactly what she wanted. And there was not that kind of softness which we are trained into believing, that this woman is this, you know, emotional pulp who will do anything for her man. So I just wanted to know what prompted you to write the book, and what were the thoughts? What was it? Was it sex, carnal desire? What was it when you were writing it?
Sex. I think sex wasn't written about at all enough. Definitely not in the way it was happening. And not from what happens in a guy's head, so to speak. So the first thing that I wanted to do was write about guilt-free, unapologetic sex, what we want for our bodies, and the singular pursuit of pleasure. That was the idea. But I couldn't simply string together a bunch of sex scenes. Obviously, there are many, including a threesome, very delicious. But it was about what goes on when a guy pursues pleasure, and then at some point starts to think about what happens to love, and goes after finding love. So the girl that you mentioned, Kara, is a 20-something girl who knows exactly what she wants for her body and for herself. She is in love with the man. He's not sure that's the kind of love he wants, because it's always through sex. And then he has another relationship. That was the idea. I think there just wasn't enough written about at all. And I said, why not? So I took the plunge. Funny thing.
So has it resolved things? Are you going to write another one after that? Is it? Do you have time?
I was meant to write a sequel. Still in my head.
Okay. So I think as a panel we have spoken quite a bit. If there's anything any of you would like to say something before we open it to the house.
I did forget to answer your original question, which was about the early work and the sexual content in those. And I read a fantastic article recently by a woman who also writes a great deal about sexuality in an upfront way. And she said, men write literature, women write pornography, when you're actually writing about the very same subject. I faced a lot of that with my early work, and even now it's very sweet. I have young schoolgirls walking up to me and saying, without a trace of irony, because it's understood differently. The word pornography now has different connotations. And they come and say to me, they say, ma'am, I really love your early books, huh? So much soft porn in it. Oof, I love it. Even though I was never allowed to read it, I used to read it secretly. So when a woman writes about sexuality, it's seen in a completely different context. And the kind of question that I'm sure Khushwant Singh never had to answer, and we collaborated on a book together, an anthology which was called Uncertain Liaisons, which were essays, academic essays on sexuality and sex, which nobody read. They expected a different kind of book. But I'm sure a man, even Anant writing about what he has, with a certain joie de vivre and playfulness and wicked, almost an irreverence, what maybe, Anant, you can answer that, whether you've ever been asked with an audience like this, but sir, is it really about your sex life? Because I'm asked that all the time. Madam, is it about your life? Acha, so all those experiences aapne zarur kiye honge. Women are asked that in a way that is leering, that is intrusive, but it's not meant to be that. The vicarious knowledge that they seek from a woman. Yes. Men are expected to have sex freely and with anybody of their choice. But there's good and bad part about this morning session, this afternoon session. Good women are not, well, they're supposed to have sex as a duty, but definitely not enjoy it. So, you know, that really is at the crux of what women experience when they express their views on sex and sexuality, which I'm sure, Anant, I don't know if you've been asked that.
Not just have good sex, the notion that men are predators and women have to provide is one of the things that the book, you know, attempts to break, is that they not just provide, they can absolutely want a fantastic sex life with whoever they want. It did not be through the role of marriage or anything like that at all. And that was it. Just great. And no research involved, all imagination. Pure 100% imagination, I think. My wife's in the audience, I'm not admit it in any case.
Oh dear, dear. Now, Amrita, I think you wanted to say something?
Well, I also wrote a book of erotic short stories published in the same year as Anand. Matter of fact, we were on a panel together on it a few years back, and somebody in the audience stood up and they said, we know women shouldn't be writing like this, and this is not what we like to see from women. And I think that one of the problems seems to be that the notions of women that bang up against each other, as we've been speaking about the good woman and the other woman. But I think things, as you said, have really been changing, and so I thought maybe in that context, we could, when we open up to questions, people could speak a little bit.
I think life is about constant change, and things are happening all the time. The whole thing of gender, in fact, what is happening today, I see, and as Shobha rightly pointed out, the aggression of femininity has taken on a completely different turn. So I think it's a good time now for, and it's a wonderfully balanced audience to open it up, and I think all of us are here on the firing line perhaps, and we'd be happy to say what we have to. Yes. Yeah, and if I may request, and I think I can be quite lethal about it, we don't need comments at the moment. They can be exchanged at lunchtime. Specific questions to specific people. And if it is not a specific question, if it's just a comment, please leave it for the moment. Yeah? Thank you. Yes, Pavan, who would you like to ask the question, and what is your specific question?
I'd like to ask it to Shobha. You know, I don't know how to ask a question without some comment, because otherwise the question has no meaning. You see, I think she's rubbished the Kama Sutra a little too prematurely, if not aggressively. The Kama Sutra is not about impossible postures. There's only one chapter of a large book dealing with that. In the very first chapter, Vatsyayan, who wrote it, is asked by an imaginary interlocutor, why do we need this book? And I would really ask you, Shobha, to see the book in a larger context merely than from the desire not to hurt any of your body parts. Because I think it's important to understand the philosophy behind it. The question that he was asked is, why do we need this book? And Vatsyayan replies that if the four purusharthas in life are dharma, artha, kama, moksha, each of the first three pursued in proportion and none in exclusion lead automatically to the fourth, which is moksha. In other words, the pursuit of the sensual has philosophical validity, and therefore it's not important just to be a lover, but to be a good lover, in which those postures may be attempted, but you can be one even without them. Now the second point is, I'll just finish quickly. We talk about sex and God constantly, that you're not thinking of God and not thinking of sex. But in Hindu philosophy, at least the way I've read it, the whole notion is about ecstasy, which is an aspect of spirituality. When Krishna leaves Vrindavan and doesn't return when he just goes next to Mathura, the gopis are bereft. And Krishna sends Uddhav to console them. And the gopis taunt them in a very beautiful collection of poems called Bhramar Geet, where he says, what do you know of the ecstasy we felt? Of how close we felt to God? So don't lecture to us. But when he doesn't come, merely meditating on his form is another way to the absolute. So I'm not saying that God, but ecstasy is the key factor.
What a wonderful and brave defense. I love it. Having seen and gone through Mulkraj Anand's illustrated Kama Sutra, I tried to think of God and ecstasy and divine union, but I was more riveted by the illustrations. Not everybody is as evolved as Pavan and other academics here. And for them, in the popular imagination and in the popular mind, and without deconstructing or without rubbishing it, the Kama Sutra is about rejoicing in experimental and very acrobatic sex in the popular imagination, not in the world of academics. That's the only point I was trying to make, not to rubbish anything. And I love your defense. Next time I read it, I will think of Krishna, gopis, and ecstasy.
Yeah, that's wonderful, because the Kama Sutra is actually about a good life. It's about a good life, and when there's a dipping of sexuality, then both men and women are advised to read it. And there's just one chapter, Sexual Union, chapter 2. Anybody else they'd like to ask a specific question? I see a hand there. And would you tell us who you'd like to address it to, please?
Like to address it to you, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, so in the current context, the politicization of sexuality, just like to have your remarks about it in the current political climate. You think that there is a certain politicization to sexuality also, besides sort of other things which are going on. Is that something which you would get worried about?
Well, I think I'll just give you what I think personally. I think definitely everything is political now. And also the various acts which are being passed. Shobha did talk about rape and things happening to women. I am myself a bit worried about this, because where we really need justice, it is not being done. Women are still being raped, action is still not being done. It's about caste, class, political clout. And there are some women who are using these new laws and acts for their own purpose. And they are using it in a way which is not really a positive way. They're all educated women, they know their rights, and some of them are also, I think there is a absolute backlash too happening. But this always does. For any great change to happen, these are the challenges which happen. And yes, there is a politicization happening. And if there is no politicization happening, how do we make the change? Yeah, Geetika, do you want to say something? Time's up. Okay, I think this would be probably the last question, because the monitor here says time up.
Yeah,
specific to what?
Specific. It's just that you had mentioned that there's feminism, aggressiveness happening now, and there's more freedom. But at the same time, what is happening is more suppression and oppression. There's more head scars, more rape, more this. So what exactly is happening? Because one of you said, both of you are contradicting yourselves. And we are all in this confused kind of state right now.
Each one of us is contradicting ourselves, what we are saying.
You are saying there's more freedom for women.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Shobha mentioned that there is more rape, and we have to be careful about, women are afraid to go out. So there is this contradiction, this confusion in our country right now. Yeah. Women don't know whether they are free to go out. Can they wear little shorts and go out? Or should they cover themselves and go out? Should they wear headscarves? there is this complete confusion right now, which I would like you to address.
Well, you know, this panel, I'm glad we are also contradicting each other, because that's what makes it more electric. There is definitely, if you don't have dissent, there is no discourse. And I think it's a wonderful panel, and I appreciate and I listen to dissent because it makes me think. And the other thing, what you are saying, yes, there is a lot of this happening because society is changing. It's becoming extremely aggressive. Patriarchy is being seen in different ways. There's lack of education. When you're talking of headscarves and burqas, it's about identity. It's about identity politics. So there is a lot of change happening, and there is definitely a lot of dissent even in society that you see around. And this is very much part of the dynamic social change. Would anybody like to add?
Can I just add something? I think that whenever we have a breakthrough, as we had after Nirbhaya, suddenly there was a breakthrough. There was more voice and articulation about women's needs and rights. I think whenever there's a breakthrough, there's also a backlash to the breakthrough. And people's identities that were previously formed on patriarchy, on violence towards women, become threatened naturally when women become more articulate. So even as some women go out in shorts, other women are risking very unsafe situations because there's a backlash to the breakthrough that has happened. So both are possible at the same time. I don't think that they are mutually exclusive.
We have to end. We have to end now.
Yes. Can I have one sentence?
One sentence? Is it a comment?
Alka, allow me to say it and then you decide whether it's a comment or not, but it's important.
John.
No, John? I wish to say one thing.
No, sir.
I wish to make one thing. Can you hear me now? No. Thank you. I beg your pardon. I just want to make one request. We mustn't mix up rape with love. Rape is not an act of love. You keep talking about it. It keeps coming up. It's an act of violence, of dominance. It's a destructive act. It's the exact opposite. It is love denied, love frustrated, if you like, but it's certainly nothing of it. Like to do nothing.
Sir, nobody mixed up the two at all. Nobody mixed it up. We're talking about the expression of sex and had nothing to do with the love component, which of course remains distinct and separate. Thank you.
Ashok, I'd just like to thank my panelists. I'd like to thank each one of you, Anand, Amrita, Shobha, and Divya, for being wonderful, energetic, proactive panelists. Thank you very much. And thank you for the audience.
Thank you, everybody. We'll break up for lunch, and at 2:30 we meet here again for very interesting sessions which are coming up. Those of Shobha Day, and Mr. Raghavan is here to talk about Pakistan. Sheila Reddy is there, but more important, Shobha Day's session is there. And then finally, in the evening, we have Mr. Shatrughan Sinha. So we meet at 2:30 again here. Thank you very much.